you for all the information you gave us in the first segment about being careful about who you do business with, about the grant being able to be used for soft costs, which includes just about all of the land prep and challenges that we have connecting to utilities, sewer issues, septic issues, and so forth. So we really appreciate that, and we want to continue the conversation. One thing that comes up with a lot of homeowners, the reimbursement of the cost. So, we've had challenges getting the funds out, which you mentioned in the first segment. And then it's kind of like chicken and egg, what comes first. They have to get the architect. They need to have a good idea of what they're building, a general idea of the budget, and certain things like architectural design and that type of stuff has to be paid for. And sometimes they're paying out of pocket before they can get the loan in place or access to cash and certainly get the grant. So can you kind of talk about how the ideal would flow and then how reimbursements work?
Certainly. So I definitely, this is a very challenging area, as in the state of California's website specifically says reimbursement for pre-development cost.
Right.
But within the same breath, there is the conversation that there will not be funds that will be actually sent or provided to the homeowner who pursues it. So it is kind of like a chicken and egg. How can I move forward 2 steps, but then have to stay in a certain lockdown position? So I would implore anyone who is looking to do an ADU and they're looking to participate in the grant funds is to try to hold your purse strings as tight as possible. Try to lean on as many items as you possibly can. And when I say that, say you are consulting a contractor or an architect to put your project together. Send us an email and say, Catherine, I need to see if you can help me buy some time, or at least assure the architect or the contractor that they're going to be paid out of the grant funds to allow work to kind of be moving forward with the understanding that, that person's awarded a grant and they in turn are going to cover your invoice. Because unfortunately, under the program, I cannot issue a check directly to the participant. The invoice has to be paid to either an architect or a contractor, whoever is doing your pre-development work. Okay? With that said, I am happy to, once we do open the portal up, which we'll touch on that here shortly again, for those of you who have not been awarded the grant and are looking to pursue it, make sure once you are awarded, you reach out to our organization and say, hey, I'm looking to work with XYZ company. Is there a way that you can let them know that the invoice will be paid so they will start work? And I will tell you, it's easier said than done, because a lot of people see the transparency with our organization. They have seen and heard from other professionals that, yes, she means it. You send her the invoice, and as soon as the people are awarded, you're paid. We have no reason to hold the money. We want to make sure we get those invoices paid. So I still have to comply with what the state is requiring. And I know in one instance, the website says X, and a lot of people are expecting X. But again, the process is that the invoice is provided to us and we in turn pay the invoice after the person has in fact been awarded the grant funds.
Okay, and so this is very similar to traditional real estate in the area of having an escrow account. And sometimes during the transaction before escrow closes, there's work that needs to be done on a property, and we have to find a vendor, a contractor, or someone who's willing and able to do the work and to wait on payment. And so sometimes when that's tangible materials they have to buy, some of them are not willing or strong enough to pay out of their pocket and wait for payment. So in the ADU grant area, I understand that we have to use a managed escrow account. And so the money goes into that and is administered very similar to traditional escrow accounts. And so we're talking about paying the invoices when they're due, not necessarily at the close of an escrow, but just managed. It's a little construction type of thing. And also, if they are coming in with cash and they have receipts, there may be some credit adjustments or whatever, but not a check in hand. But they may be credited for things that they paid. Is that correct?
Right. Exactly.
Okay.
And so let me just step us back. So once you complete the application is then in review to make sure that you meet the income guidelines and you actually are an owner who appears on the deed. And that could be a single family home or multi-unit. So if you're owner occupant of multi-units, we would be willing to give you the grant funds.
Okay.
Once we do give you clearance to say, okay, that application's good, we immediately submit it and we lock down the reservations for your $40,000 grant. Now, where we have to wait, and that's where there's been several delays, is we have to wait for the state to then in turn issue the award letters and disperse the funds. That's truly where the delays have been in this process. Okay. And they have to do their part. The state has to move certain things around to make sure that they can get these funds dispersed. But once the funds are dispersed, simultaneously, we will send out not only the award letter, but we send out the fund control agreement. A fund control agreement is just like opening up a bank account, a savings account, or an escrow account. And it's with a third-party organization known as La Mesa Fund Control. They are vetted, licensed, insured to do the work of managing accounts and managing escrows. Okay. And so once that managed escrow account is open, the state then in turn sends in the $40,000. Now that's to cover specifically your pre-development cost.
Right.
You still have to cover the hard cost to get your ADU project built. Right. So let's take an example. Say it's $100,000 to build all in your ADU, and I'm just using small numbers. Okay. Say that you're going to get $40,000 from the state of California's ADU grant. That leaves us $60,000. We need you to then fully fund the account for this project, the $60,000. Okay.
Right.
That in turn will trigger the ability for us to then start to pay your pre-development cost. Okay. Now, a lot of people say, well, I got the grant, or I'm going to pursue the grant and get the financing later. Not a problem. Submit for the grant and we will wait for you to get the financing. Once we lock in that reservation and that funding will sit in your managed account until you are ready to get started with your project. Okay. It's not an interest-bearing account, because I get that quite a bit. Am I going to be earning interest on this money? Or I'm taking money from my savings account, which I'm making XYZ in interest. If I put that money over there, am I making interest? No. Right. The reason the state requires that the account be fully funded is because $40,000 is a substantial amount of money. The state wants to ensure that they gave 40, we're going to get an ADU out of this. Yeah. That's where the successes are going to be. The state wants to say, we put $100 million into this project. We committed to do 2,500. We want to make sure that we get 2,500 ADUs. And so to ensure that, all funds need to be in for your particular project. And that's based off of the scope of work that the contractor who you're working with, who you selected, says it's going to cost to make it happen. And if it's not a contractor, it could be a prefab company, modular manufactured company. Whatever they say the cost is, we will cover the pre-development cost. One other thing I want people to also be aware of is when we award you that $40,000 money, that $40,000 grant, understand that the state of California is going to give you a 1099 the following year. So any awards that were had in 2022, January of 2023, you are going to get a 1099. So I always advise people to consult a tax advisor or a CPA so you understand what the tax components may be regarding receiving a grant like this, because none of you are a nonprofit organization. So you must look at the tax ramifications with participating in a program like this, because 1099, that could pretty much mean that that's income that you have to account for the 2022 calendar year. So just keep that in mind as you start to move forward in this process. Now, some people say, well, maybe I should or maybe I shouldn't. When you consult your tax advisor, they're also going to be looking at the fact that many of you are going to be renting out these spaces.
Yes.
So it pretty much could be a wash, but it would be inappropriate for me to say, here's a grant, and then not advise you to also talk with your tax advisor. Yeah. So make sure you do that prior to when we open this portal up in the coming weeks.
Yeah.
Make sure you've consulted your tax advisor.
Yeah, I think that's great, and we need to really consult the tax advisor when considering building the ADU. Like you said, if it's for rental income, or even if it's just going to improve the value of the property, it's going to change your tax basis for your property, and everything. So having that full picture to look at the overall is great. So yes, that's great advice for the audience.
And it's key for people to understand. You no longer, for those of you that are going to rent it out and start to monetize on your properties, unused space, you have to realize you're transitioning yourself from homeowner to now you're getting into the business of ADUing, and you become a landlord. And that's what we all need to realize. There's a business to this process. And in order for your business to be successful, you have to set up the key components to be successful in this space. You've got to get yourself with a proper tax advisor, a CPA, who understands tax code. You've got to get yourself aligned with a real estate attorney who can address issues when you've got tenants who don't want to pay their rent. California is a tenant state. It's not a landlord state. And so if you got somebody sitting in your property who's not paying your rent, you have to know how to go about that accordingly. So I stress that there is a business of ADUing for those of you who are going to rent it out to outside people and even family members, that you have to understand what you're getting yourself into instead of just seeing, oh, I got an extra few dollars coming in the house. You've got to run it like a business, because if you don't, any business that's not run and set up accordingly, you will lose.
Exactly. And we always talk about building generational wealth, and it has to be on a solid foundation, which includes having your insurance, your tax, your legal, that stool of those three components there, and people that you can rely on. Otherwise, it's not generational wealth. It might be a generational curse.
Generational curse.
Yeah, we just don't know how to leverage. So we have to put the infrastructure there. I think that's just really great advice. And sometimes when we're talking to homeowners, when we're talking about building ADUs, it's like we use simple math. Like, it's going to cost $200,000 to build, and that's just too much. But let's look at how much is the rent going to be. Let's look at cash flow. Let's look at the property value. Let's look at what you're going to do for your family and how you can strengthen your financial foundation. So it's not simple math. It is business.
No.
It can be very successful, and we need to get in the mindset of looking forward and building that. So I definitely appreciate it. We're going to take another short break, and we're going to come back with Catherine and talk a little bit more about the grant and what our next steps should be if we're interested in building an ADU. And then we're going to touch on the new home buyer program with Bank of America. So stay tuned. I'm sure you're getting a lot of great information, and I know that you want to know how to access the funds and what your next steps should be.